Good afternoon, I guess it is, just past the noon hour mark. My name is Susan Henderson, and I'm your host for the noon hour discussion that we're having on behalf of Colchester East-Hants branch of the Canadian Mental Health Association and our board and staff and volunteers. I'm very happy to welcome you to our today's session, which is the first one of Mental Health Week, CMHA Mental Health Week, Mental Health and Grief. First, I would like to begin by acknowledging that we are in Mi'kma'ki, the ancestral territory of the Mi'kmaq people, and this territory is covered by the treaties of peace and friendship which the Mi'kmaq and Maliseet people first signed with the British in 1725. The treaties didn't deal with the surrender of the land. It established the rules for an ongoing relationship between nations. As well, we are also in the province of Nova Scotia, which was settled and built by people of African ancestry in the 18th and 19th centuries. These people were formative in the building of our communities in meaningful ways and have contributed to the development of Nova Scotia as we know it today. We must not forget that we are all treaty people. Before we get started, I have a couple of housekeeping items. If you joined us before, just at the noon hour mark, you would have heard recording in progress. So it is being recorded, just so for people's comfort as well. You're certainly welcome to take your picture off the screen if necessary, and you're certainly welcome to keep yourself on the screen. But we do ask that you mute yourself so that we can limit the feedback to a minimum. As we all know with these Zoom meetings, that can become an issue. And we certainly want everyone to be able to hear today. I would like to take a minute to talk about Mental Health Week, and it is CMHA's Mental Health Week, and the Canadian Mental Health Association has been hosting this week for 71 years, which is super significant. It takes place annually during the first full week of May, and of course we're in that now, believe it or not. The goal of Mental Health Week is to promote knowledge and attitudes that support meaningful social change, and the theme of this year is empathy. And a very, very good topic, I think, where you look at what's going on in our world. And if you spend any time on social media, you certainly see sometimes the lack of empathy or a lot of empathy being offered to fellow folks, wherever community they may be in. Empathy is the ability to share someone else's feelings or experiences by imagining what it would be like to be in their situation. And certainly today's topic is bang on with that. To mark Mental Health Week, we are proud to present Empathy in Action, which is a virtual speaker series that highlights the important role that empathy plays in community mental health. And we're pleased to be the first, have the first speaker today, which is Sam Madore. Before we get into chatting with Sam, I would like to introduce the Executive Director of CMHA Nova Scotia Division, which is Kern Nichols. Kern, would you like to say a few words before we begin?
For sure. Thanks, Susan. And thanks, Sam, for participating in our very first kickoff session for the week. I'm looking forward to it. And I'd like to thank those who are attending the session on mental health and grief. I really appreciate your participation for a whole bunch of reasons, but mostly because everything we learn about mental health supports the destigmatization of mental health in society. And it's only kind of through this destigmatization that we can really create communities where everyone is treated equitably, and communities where everyone, can get help in the same way that they would for a physical ailment. So I really appreciate you all being here. My name's Kern Nichols, and I'm the ED of CMHA Nova Scotia Division. As Susan alluded to, we've been around for quite a while, since 1918, and we're part of the oldest and most extensive community mental health organizations in the province. We're part of a federation, which means that we have this sort of national presence, but we also work at the grassroots level through the branches. And at the division level, we support all of that good work here and Truro, Colchester, Halifax, Dartmouth, and in Southwest Nova. And we want to support the mental health needs of Nova Scotians throughout the province in a number of different ways, through education, through advocacy, and through the navigation of this complex system that we find ourselves in. So the other thing that I'd want to highlight is that we are not the Mental Health Foundation, which we often get confused with as well. So anyway, without further ado, I'm going to hand it over to Susan and Sam to get on with the event.
Thank you so much, Kern. I really appreciate that introduction. And speaking of introductions, it's now my great pleasure to introduce Sam Madore. And Sam Madore is an entrepreneur, speaker, and mental health advocate who wears many hats. She is a marketing and event professional who inspires her clients to find creative ways to promote their businesses, organizations, and events through social and traditional media. Sam is also a published author, which we're going to hear a little bit about today, with 3 children's books that address mental health topics such as bullying, anxiety, and grief, and is the host of the Let Me Overthink About It podcast, which I absolutely love that name, where she and her guests explore topics that occupy their anxious minds. A connector of people, Sam thrives on collaboration and prides herself on being real. How interesting that one of the hashtags for Mental Health Week is Get Real. So it's perfect person to have on today. She thrives on collaboration and inspires and challenges others to rise to the occasion and works hard to make her community a more cohesive place. And I've been fortunate to see that actually in action. Sam, you and I have known each other for years, and I'm, super proud to call you my friend and colleague. You became involved with us as part of your mental health journey, and both of us honestly have grown through that experience. I know, at least I have. I think you have as well. We've always had the ability to tackle difficult topics. We've had some fantastic discussions, and today is no exception to that. I do want to stress, however, that today is about your personal journey, Sam's personal journey. It's not meant to reflect anyone else and for what they may be going through. We know, for example, that the Mass Casualty Commission inquiry proceedings is bringing back tragic memories for our community. And I can't fathom, as I'm sure all of us on the Zoom call would agree, that we really can't fathom the pain and intense pain and suffering that friends and family must be going through. Of course, we hope today's presentation resonates with people who are listening, but we would never pretend that we can understand or give advice that may be completely inappropriate for others who are grieving. It's a personal journey and it needs a personal approach. So in saying personal journey, Sam, what would you like us to know about you? That's how we'll start, and tell us about your mental health journey.
Thank you, Susan. Man, that's a lot. When I hear all of those things listed, I'm like, yeah, I do wear quite a few hats, don't I? And I do want to acknowledge as well that I'm currently sitting as the interim executive director at the United Way of Colchester as well for a maternity leave position. And, that was absolutely a decision for my mental health, was to be able to take on a role that focused in one area for a while, to maybe not wear as many hats for a certain amount of time. So a lot of the decisions that I have made in the last couple of years have been specifically focused on my mental health and wellness. So I just wanted to start by saying that. Start with another caveat, and thank you for saying that, Susan, that this is my experience. I'm certainly not an expert on grief. I am an expert on my experience with mental illness and grief, and I look forward to just having a conversation with you, Susan, because we're so good at it. We're good at just chit-chatting. So hopefully you guys will take some value from this conversation as well. So to answer your question, I've struggled with depression and anxiety most of my life. I wasn't aware of that until later in life as an adult, where it all kind of came to light in the workplace. There was a lot of, things that were happening that had probably happened for a long time before I really realized or recognized that it was something I needed to deal with, something that was, an illness, not just me having a hard day or whatnot. And a lot of my struggles come around the expectations that I set for myself and how I sort of manage my day-to-day around those expectations. And when I was able to recognize that I am struggling with an illness, I was able to get a better handle on how to manage my day-to-day and how to make decisions, like I said, how to make decisions for myself and for my mental wellness. And I won't keep rambling. I will make this a conversation, Susan, in a second.
No, it's okay. You just continue on. You're doing great.
I just wanted to draw on the connection with with grief, the reason I think that we're having this conversation today is, of course, as we've all known and seen, there's been grief happening in ways that we never would have even expected. And so to be able to have this frank conversation and my personal experience with grief after the loss of my mom 2 years ago, and how that has affected things in addition to the grief that's happened from the pandemic as well.
Yes. It's interesting you mentioned about as you became older, that you recognized that the feelings that you were actually struggling with were anxiety and depression. And I just that really resonated with me initially, because I certainly had people might find this, well, some that know me would not find it strange, but I struggle with anger management issues. I find myself becoming very angry very quickly and not knowing why. It would just sort of hit me like a tidal wave to come out of anywhere. And as I've gotten older, and certainly my time with Canadian mental health has led me to realize that we're talking about anxiety. And what I would do would become angry to try and control that, and to stop, just slow it down and try to take charge of it and use my anger for that. So it's very interesting that you noted that, because I think that's probably an experience for a lot of people.
I think too, of our generation, like I feel like, when I was in school, it certainly wasn't something that we were identifying. When you hear mental illness, it was some untouchable thing. It was like, oh no, I would that's not something I would struggle with. That's like, I'm not extreme enough, or however you identify that in your head. It was like, that wasn't my experience at the time, to be able to sit and identify and have those conversations. And now that we can, I think it's great. And I love that, teenagers now who are experiencing a lot of the things I would have experienced back in junior high are actually able to, and I hope this is the case, are able to have those conversations a little bit more freely.
Yeah, absolutely. There's more acceptance for that, so that there can be an exploration of sort of what's going on, what's happening for people.
That's right.
Yeah.
And I just noticed, I'm going to guess this is Aaron, who just made a comment about mics, just making sure you guys have your mics turned off. I guess there's a little bit of feedback happening. So if you could all mute your microphone, please. And thank you.
Thank you, Sam, for noticing that. I'm still new at this Zoom stuff. So, loss of a loved one is absolutely, and I've had my own experiences with grief. It's really one of, I would say, life's most stressful events. It's really up there, and it can cause a major emotional crisis for sure. What are some of the connections that you've made between mental health and grief?
I'm going to start by saying, we talk about get real, and I'm having a very emotional day today. So I just, I started this conversation on Global News this morning, if anybody caught that conversation, and it sort of started my day in a place of emotion around this. So I apologize in advance for that. But again, it's part of the grief process, and it's what comes out, comes out. I feel like, and this may sound dramatic, and I feel like if somebody had said this to me before I lost my mom, I would have been like, that's dramatic. But I feel like I'm not the same person. Like I have to recreate who I am without her here. So, and interestingly enough, mom died right at the beginning of the pandemic. So right at this state of emergency, like, so it was weird. It was like this whole world exists that we don't know about, but it's a world that mom will never know. So those feelings of like living in a world that is so bizarre and so unusual for us, but also that mom will never be a part of in body, was just surreal. Like I can't even wrap my head around the words to describe it. It was like, how can I function in this crazy world without the person that I usually turn to say, how do I navigate this new thing? Or how do I navigate all of these changes? She wasn't here for that. And so that was a shift. And that was also because I struggle with anxiety and depression. I feel like I'm starting low. Like I'm starting from a place of not having all of the things that I need in place to function daily, to get out of bed, to go and do those things. So I'm starting at a low bar. And so basically the grief compounded all of the anxiety and depression that I had already been experiencing.
When you think about the loss of control, though, I mean, certainly grief, that's the huge thing. I think that's probably one of the hardest things around grief. There's no ability to control. It happens to you, and all you can try to manage is your reaction. In some ways, mental health is the same way. You try to manage it, but you can't predict it, you can't control it, you just try to roll with it. Let's throw in the pandemic and the fact that mental health and grief, what we've traditionally done is we've connected, and then we've been able to feel better, if I can put it that way, or feel grounded, or whatever it is. We just feel better, more connected that way. But you couldn't even do that in the pandemic. I know your family wasn't able to get together to grieve after your mom passed.
It, like, to even look back on it, it feels so like just like a world that didn't even exist. So having this conversation just feels like I'm talking about somebody else. Like it's like I look back on that, like I couldn't just go to my sister's house and give them a hug. Like it's just a weird, like how, and I always think about those conversations with mom, like what would she be saying right now? Like how, like, and I know I feel her here. I do have a spiritual belief that she is here, but having said that, physically she's not here, and we'll never know that experience. And in a lot of ways, I was kind of grateful that she wasn't here for some of this, because she would have been sick through it. So to me, being sick through the pandemic, I can't imagine the folks who were in hospital, who weren't able to visit their loved ones, who weren't able to have those lasting memories of their final days with their loved ones. Like I honestly can't imagine that either. So yeah, we're all in this place of confusion around what grief looks like and how to kind of navigate through it.
And at the same time, we know that, through literature and certainly personal experiences, that the ideas of grief that we do have in this society, and certainly my experience, they're not super healthy. They don't really come from I guess, incorporation of, because we live, we die, and the journey that's in that is a natural part of living. And we tend to think of it as, something horrific and over to the side that we don't want to deal with and think about until we absolutely have to, which
Totally.
makes it doubles it down in terms of the shock value, if I can put it that way, of it.
Exactly. And I think about just the basics of what you're saying there, Susan, like, and I know Mike Francis is on this call, and he works for our local hospice society, Colchester East-Hants. And I just think about the word death and dying and dead. You're like, yeah, death is part of life and we all go through it. But for whatever reason, we avoid that word at all costs. Like we don't talk about it. And I think in a lot of ways, having gone through this pandemic and having sort of come to some sort of level playing ground, if I can call it that. I mean, we'll certainly never all be on the same playing ground, but as much as we can be on a level playing ground, we now are at least talking about it a bit more. We're saying things like death. We're saying she died. We're saying, like, having those conversations that we should be having, and especially, with the younger generation who are trying to kind of figure out what the heck is happening.
Definitely. And then how do I react to it? How do I incorporate this in my life and I guess give it some meaning? Yeah. And I guess, when you look at the depth of the emotion, I think that people are feeling, it certainly can question you to question your stability, your mental health stability. That's for sure.
You brought up anger. I just have to interrupt you for 1 second,
Please.
Susan, because you brought up anger, and I feel like my experience with anger has always been like it's a non-emotion, like it's like a made-up emotion. It's like just a symptom of something else, right? And it wasn't until Mom died that I really knew what anger felt like. Like it was like I believe it to actually be the emotion that it is, or the feeling that it is, because when you lose control like that and you wish for a different outcome for someone you care for and love, and I just feel like that anger has been the thing throughout the last 2 years that I have not been able to manage. Like I'm used to crying, like I'm not, having emotions around things in life, death, or just whatever, like everyday things. but the anger was something I really had to find a way to cope with differently, because I wasn't used to it. I didn't know what was happening really with that.
And you have to look at the acceptance of that. I mean, it's not okay to go to your local grocery store and because you get frustrated with somebody in the aisle to start slamming carts around. And yet, so, you have to suppress. It's one of those feelings that is not comfortable for people to witness. And certainly we have all kinds of laws around aggression, which is sometimes a result of anger. So it's a tough one. That's a tough one as an outcome, as you say, secondary emotion outcome, but it's still a very important one to acknowledge.
Because it's like, what do you do with it? Like that's the thing, right? And I guess my favorite definition of grief is that it's love with nowhere to go. And I guess anger too in this case was exactly that as well. It was like my anger was connected to the love that had nowhere to go. I was like, where do I put this energy? Where do I put this? How do I spend my energy with this feeling of anger that I can't shake?
Because in the end, the person's not there. They're gone.
Yes. Yeah. And there's no one to blame. Like
that's right.
I can't take it out on anyone. It's not, and I can try, I guess I can try to find a bad guy in the scenario, but cancer is the bad guy. And I certainly have not ever met cancer and had a conversation.
Let me know when you do. We'll tackle them together. I've got a couple of baseball bats somewhere. I think I can rouse up. I think we might have a lot of other people joining in on with us.
That's right. So it just becomes that another thing that you sort of don't really know how to manage. And when you're stuck at home and not able to see family and friends and some of the usual outlets that you might have for that, it just compounded all of that as well, which, I think we're now getting to a place where we can start to manage it, but there's also all that stuff we've been bottling that
definitely
needs a place to resurface safely.
Safely, good word. So as we're chatting about, the connections between mental health and grief, and as you went along on your grief journey, did those connections change for you in any way?
I think so. I mean, it's funny because I have felt a bit of judgment around this, but my first real experience with loss and grief was when my dog died 3 years ago. Susan, Hank.
Yes, loved Hank.
And that was, for me, the biggest loss I'd had. And of course, I'd lost family members, but I've always lost family members to age. And so you can sort of wrap and not to discard those losses, but you can wrap your head around that a little bit more. And so when I lost Hank, my best friend, my little love, my heart dog, that was my first time experiencing grief. And he changed my experience of grief for the rest of my life. He allowed me, I look at it now as a gift. And at the time I did not, but I look at it as a gift now to say, he allowed me to feel my feelings. Like he made it okay for me to go into a store and stand in line for a coffee and cry because I just had to. Like, it was like, I didn't have any control over my emotions, but it was like, no, I was like, he somehow made it okay for me to be comfortable feeling my feelings in public, because a lot of times too, like, I said, I cry a lot, I do a lot of things, but I wasn't owning those feelings to other people. And he gave me that gift of being able to finally acknowledge that, I don't feel well. I'm not happy. I have to take a step back from fill in the blank because of this grief that I'm feeling. And he made that okay. And it kind of paved the way for when Mom died, was he made that okay so that I was on the path to that already when I lost Mom. So I think for sure in the last 3 years, my definition of grief has changed.
So what has been most helpful along the way?
Conversations like this. I mean, it's funny because I had friends who had lost parents. And of course, when they die, you reach out and you say, I'm so sorry, please let me know if there's anything, you do the things until you feel it. Like, I actually went back to, this is maybe a bit silly, but I actually went back to friends who had lost their moms or parent or fathers and said, I'm sorry, I don't think I reacted the way that I should have in that situation, because it takes a whole, like, it just takes on its own identity in your life. And so I feel like for me, what has helped is having those conversations with people who get it. It's same with my depression. It's like, once you find the people who get it, keep them in your life so that you can have these real conversations with them and work your way through them. Because otherwise, I mean, I don't know what I would do without a supportive husband and a supportive friend group and sisters. And I don't know what I would do. But aside from talking about it, writing has been the thing that has really helped me through my grief. I shared in the conversation, and I'm looking, Debbie, at your comment. Thank you for watching the interview on Global this morning. I shared this morning that I would write to my mom. It was the day after she died, was my first entry to her in a journal. And I wrote to her every single day for a year. And I'll still go back to that journal when I feel like I really need to. I mean, I talk to her all the time, but when I feel like I really need to get something out, I'll still write to her in this journal. And that was my saving grace. I am so grateful that I had started that when I did and continued through.
So I just have to tell you this, is I did the same thing when my dad passed away. I called up my friends and apologized, because I just felt like I had been, I apologize for not being there for them, because I felt like I had been flippant. You put out I'm so sorry. And of course, those things are very important. But as you say, I didn't understand the impact that it has, and how difficult it can be to pick yourself up and move forward, and wanted to acknowledge that with people that had gone through that.
Yeah. And still is, like, and I love when people can acknowledge that grief doesn't just end. Like, how you, and the disservice that those 7 stages of grief have done to the world, like those were taught to people as if you go through a checklist of things and then you're done. It's like, the fact
come out
that
the other end and it's all good.
The fact that was ever taught to anyone is such a disservice, because grief is not over ever. Like, again, it connects back. And I saw somebody commenting that you tell your son, sorry, who was it? Oh, Jana, it was that you tell your son that grief is proof that there was deep love in the first place. So you don't just lose love when that person dies, you're still holding on to that. But I love, and I've shared this with you before, Susan, the quote that, or I don't know if it was a quote or a meme or something, but how grief doesn't get smaller, you just grow around it.
Yes.
And when I heard that or saw that visual, I was like, that is so, so true. I'm never going to lose that feeling of sadness over the loss of my mom, my best friend. Like, that's never, ever, ever going to go away. So I just loved that. That's
fantastic comments coming through. Grief is just love with no place to go. That's the quote you referenced earlier.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah, and as you indicate, it changes you. You don't go back to the person that you were before. And it's, I think, important that people understand that. I mean, we have an expectation, and then when that doesn't happen, I think that gets in the way of mental health as well. That, creates anxiety and potentially depression. And if I can just say this too, because I saw a comment earlier, grief can be many things, and particularly, and I don't want to diminish what you're saying in any way, Sam, I just wanted to throw this in here, is that it can also be things like loss of job, loss of freedom, with COVID, we weren't able to go around, loss of not being able to travel, things that are important to you. And isn't that interesting? My brain just goes to, which is another issue we've talked about before. So the other thing too, in ending of a relationship, is that we have this comparison idea in our heads, don't we? And you probably went through that with Hank. There probably part of your brain was saying, this is my pet, this isn't a parent, or if I was going through that, to equate your grief with mine, we do that because we want to create empathy. And we want to create understanding. But then I know I do this little thing in my head. It's like I do a comparison. Well, how dare I feel that way? Because look at somebody else is going through what I'm going through.
Yeah, I did that. And I'll be honest, and I don't want to go too much into it, but you mentioned the mass casualty or the mass shooting. And, it was like, in my head, I was like, well, at least I knew that mom was going to die eventually. Like I knew she was sick, basically. So I felt like, man, my grief isn't as bad as everyone who lost a loved one that day, which you just can't go down that road. Like there's just no comparison, because your life is your life, and your experience, like we talked about at the beginning, it's like your experience of grief, and that doesn't change how my loss feels now.
No, it's interesting when we were chatting, preparing for this a little bit, we chatted about, when we chatted about before, guilt. The guilt becomes part of grief as well. Sometimes just, person's trying to deal with it. We're pretty hard on ourselves, are we not? Let's throw in some guilt in there. Maybe things that we could have done or could have done differently or should have done. Did you want to talk about that for a minute?
Man, guilt is brutal. It's like just that. Yeah. And I think with anxiety too, if I can connect it back to
Yes, please. Yeah.
mental illness, guilt and mental illness, or guilt and anxiety in particular, I think we talked about my podcast, Let Me Overthink About It. The guilt associated with overthinking is ridiculous. Like for me, it's like, I worry about absolutely every possible outcome. If I said something to you today, Susan, that I thought maybe you misinterpreted, and then I felt guilty that I had said it in the first place, or that, and I've
created that's rolling it over and over and over in your head. Yeah.
That I've created the whole scenario. Like you might have heard me say it and just whatever, it didn't even affect you in the least. But just ruminating over those thoughts. And so compound that by somebody dying, and you never get to go back to you. Like I wouldn't be able to go back to you and say, Susan, sorry I said that, if that offended you or whatever, because that person's gone. I can't go back and have that conversation. So that guilt is almost as strong as, like I was talking about, the anger, is that feeling of just lack of control and I don't know what to do with it, where to put it.
And not able to resolve it in the way that you normally would. Like you and I, we've learned that, because I'm the same way. I can say something and then that's all I think about. We've had this long conversation, it's 3 words I said, but we go back and we check in with each other and you say, I'm worried that I offended you. And then each of us are like, are you kidding me? I don't even remember you saying that. But you can't, when someone passes away, you can't go back and do that. So you're left with that, which, certainly would add to the hopelessness and the despair that people are feeling, because you can't correct that, what you perceive as a mistake.
Absolutely. And I think too, I always talk about, when in relation to my depression and my anxiety, is my rational versus irrational brain. And my rational brain, I consider myself to be a very smart person in terms of, especially around self-awareness. Like I know myself very well. I know what works for me. I know that writing to my mom helped. I know that going for walks helps with my mental health. I know all of those things in my rational brain. But I feel like when grief hit, my irrational brain just took over. Like even though I had those thoughts and I knew at the root of it and in my core that what I needed to do to help myself, once my irrational brain took over with grief, I had to really break through it. How do you turn that off? Yeah, exactly. And like I said, conversations have helped with that, because, and I mean, it does just feel good to know that other people have experienced this before and that you aren't alone. I know that sounds kind of corny or cliche to say, but it really does help to sit and hear somebody say something that you thought you were the only one who was experiencing that feeling of guilt, or that feeling of, I don't know, hopelessness. So it does help to have the conversations around it.
Yeah, even when it's not fun to admit it. But you're right, you kind of wade into that water, hopefully with a trusted confidant, and they say right back to you. I've been struggling with it too. We did see a comment actually in the chat, and people were saying that it's deliberate. It takes you to your knees, the guilt at times.
Oh yeah.
And how do you incorporate that into the grief?
Yeah, absolutely.
Sorry, go ahead.
No, I was just going to say it's a learning process for sure.
Is there anything else that's really been unhelpful, was least helpful when you look back and as you continue on?
I mean, I don't know the answer to that. Like, I feel like again, with the overthinking in my brain, I just feel like my expectations of myself have often gotten in the way. Like, so I would, and again, it comes back to you're trying to break through what you think grief looks like, which it has an end time, or it has, you know, a shelf life, whatever you want to call it. It's like, I have to break through that. And if I still, and I say still, it's only been 2 years, and I see Jana talking about her dad who passed away in 97. Yes. It doesn't get any easier. And so I just think for myself, I have to stop expecting myself to be anywhere in my grief process, yes, because every single day is going to look completely different. And, you know, and I will just going back to guilt too, Susan, is another feeling of guilt is that I'm still here and mom isn't. So like, you know, somebody who's struggled with depression for most of my life, and I'll insert a trigger warning for suicide. Mm-hmm. I've had thoughts of taking my life in the past. And when I sat after mom died and thought to myself, mom wanted to still be here. Like, you know, she was young and she wanted to still be here. But I, at times in my life, have not. And so even though me dying before her would have devastated her and all of those things, in my head, I was thinking, I'm feeling guilty, or I'm feeling bad, or I wish that it was the case that she, who wants and has always wanted to be here, could still be here, and that maybe I shouldn't.
Thank you for saying that's, I'm seeing people react. I'm seeing hearts and people crying. That's really resonating with people, Sam. And thank you for that honest statement. I think that's, yeah, that's bang on. Yeah. Yeah. Is there things that bring you hope?
You know, and I talked about this morning too on Global, is like, I love the thought of continuing to make my mom proud. Finding ways that I can do things. It's always weird how I can do something, like taking on this new job, like I said, without mom knowing it really is weird for me, but continuing to do things that I know she would be proud of, or, you know, taking time to listen to the music that she loved to listen to and think about the memories and laugh. Like, her sense of humor was amazing. So she would want me to still laugh and have fun and remember all those times and think of her like she was still here, you know?
Absolutely.
So
I do the same thing. I'll going into a difficult meeting, or even, you know, nervousness around today, I will talk to Dad and ask him for strength. Yeah, and I'm seeing, look here, I have a playlist of my dad's favorite music. I often play it while I commute to work. I love that. That's fantastic. It's those little things that keep people alive for us, and that they're, I guess, constant reminders that they're still around and still with us.
100%. Music is the thing for me. Like, we talked about writing too, but if I'm just I need a moment to just kind of get to a certain place in my life, or a certain place with mom, music is the thing. Like, and same as what Jana's saying in the comments, I have mom's old CDs in my car, and I'll just play those, and just, I can hear her singing along with me, and I can, you know, those, you know, it's so funny. And I have to say this, it's off topic. Sorry, Erin, if you're watching, but it's off topic. I was so sad when I heard that Naomi Judd passed away on the weekend, and one of the CDs that I have in my car that was mom's is the Judds' greatest hits, and we used to sing that and belt that out at the top of our lungs. And I will play that and belt it out. But I think you know this, Susan, we used to actually call ourselves the Duds, because we were like singing along, car concert, the two of us singing along to the Judds, but we were the Duds. So anyway, so those little things that can make you laugh through the tears are all there. That's all you can do.
Yeah, they certainly do bring hope. I think a sense that there's a continuity to life, and continuity for memories and things that you can still pick up and hold.
And I just want to jump in and say thank you to John for sharing, and yeah, sorry, Susan, you're better to
No,
speak
no,
to
no,
that.
you go right ahead. No, I noticed that too. Thank you for sharing, John. We hope that you're feeling better, and in a better place. But yeah, it's again, there's a grief of a loss of a relationship. This stuff can bring you to your knees for sure.
And sometimes that can be harder, because it's a choice that somebody made, right? So it can
Definitely.
feel, if somebody chooses to divorce you or leave you, and I feel like that requires a different set of mental skills to work through that, right? Because they are still here.
Yeah.
They're, so I appreciate you for sharing that, John.
Has there been anything you didn't expect, Sam?
I think for me, what I didn't expect was this. Talking about it, and starting my podcast, the amount of times that I have brought mom up and talked about her, it makes me so happy to be able to have conversations about her still, and just talk about her. That has surprised me that I'm able to, and of course I still get choked up and whatnot, but I've been able to have those conversations, and that's been the biggest surprise for me.
So I know also grief can be a driver for us. And I know that, for example, your book, Hank's Ball, right? That was, that came out of a place of grief for you as well.
It really did. And we had one children's book already that was focused on our little dog, Hank's t-shirt, and it was about bullying. And then Hank actually died before we published it, before it was published. And so the next children's book, we always wanted to write a series, but the next children's book, it was after mom died. So we hadn't started writing that book yet. So it was sort of a combination of our grief around losing Hank and losing mom. And man, did it ever help me. Just even going through, and I'll reference hospice again because I had conversations with Stacy at hospice and Laura McNutt at the time about how to incorporate the right language for kids who are grieving and all of those things, and being able to know that we were potentially helping kids get through their own grief was just a gift for me to know that through mom's death, I was able to come up with something that could potentially help some kids in the future too.
To provide hope, and also for parents it provides parents with a mechanism and a way to approach talking about what we've chatted about is often a very difficult subject for people. So that's what I loved about it. And it was actually here at our local Kiwanis Pond in Truro, and signposts of each page were put around the pond so that people could go and chat about that with their family and experience each one in their own way, in their own time. I just thought it was a fantastic project.
That's like a highlight of my last 2 years, is knowing that my book was around Kiwanis Pond, which was one of our favorite places to go and walk. And yeah, that was so amazing.
So we chatted about, let's see, 45 minutes now. We did want to leave some space for questions. Did anybody have a question that they wanted to bring up in the chat? I see a hand up actually with Danielle. Did you want to come on screen and unmute yourself, Danielle, or you could type it as whatever you prefer? Oh, and she's now scrambling. There we go. Maybe. She might be typing.
While Danielle's typing, I'm just going to comment too on
Yes.
Debbie's comment there about, your dad is with you every day. It's so true. And that is so comforting. And you see them, and there's little signs of them that come up, and man, it just helps to get you through those harder times. So thanks for sharing that, Debbie.
It certainly does. I think memories are, and also, as you say, little things like, maybe a feather floats down from heaven, or the favorite song comes on and something happens. It's some people might say it's coincidental, but I don't know. I take greater comfort in thinking that it's actually intentional.
100%. It's a sign. I'm with
a
you, Adrienne.
sign. Definitely. Definitely. I've been watching, and I've been sending them to Sam, actually, these links on Netflix around, life after death. And I find that they give me great comfort. We really don't know what happens to us after death. We can assume, but I like to think that there's a one that I really enjoy, from a physicist, and he basically says, invite a physicist to your funeral, anyway, the physicist talks about how our energy still exists. It's just not so compact, and it still touches your hair and your hands and your face, and it's just not as organized. And I just love that my loved one's DNA is still floating around, connecting with me on a daily basis. I love it. Janice, sorry, you want to go ahead and say something? Ask a question?
That's okay. So I just wanted to kind of share just a brief bit. So my grandmother passed away recently, and we were really close, but I guess not quite middle-aged, but almost middle-aged adult, versus when I lost my dad when I was 13, I'm coming to this from a place of wanting to grieve better. And by better, I mean in a healthier way. So I've learned how to grieve throughout my life, grieve my father, but I didn't really click with it until in recent years. So now I'm doing it in a way where I'm allowing myself to feel everything, and to be emotive, and to rely and be vulnerable on other people. And in doing so, I'm teaching my son how to do a better job of that as well, because I don't want him to grow up and then have areas where he grieves, or losses that he grieves, and feel the same way I did when I was a teenager. So it's a really great opportunity. But one little event that happened recently after my grandmother passed was we're here in Nova Scotia, and my family's in New Brunswick, and I just didn't feel comfortable going to the funeral because COVID is rampant there still, and it just seems like a terrible thing to do, to not go, but also a terrible thing to not see it. So we live streamed it with my daughter, and she's 24, and then we have my son here, and as we're sitting there, or as I'm inviting her rather, I said, oh, do you want to come over and watch it on the TV? We'll put it on the big TV, and we'll watch this funeral together. I'll bring the popcorn. And as soon as I said that, I kind of caught myself and said, oh, that was really off color. But at the same point, I giggled, because that's something my dad would have said. It is totally something he would have said. And his stipulation when he passed was that we don't have a sad, somber reception, that we come home, the adults get drunk and party. He said, he was 39 when he passed, and he said, you know what, I don't want you to have a sad time. I want you to come home, have food, friends, music, party, drink, just have a good time, because you're celebrating me, not thinking ahead of how sad it's going to be. And he would have said, I'll bring the popcorn. So we laughed. I told my mom about it. It helped her immensely as well. And then as we're watching the funeral proper, I've never experienced a funeral like this before. It was sad and somber, and my dog and my cat were racing and tearing around the house. They were like acting completely obnoxious in ways that they don't normally act. And I feel like it was the thing that got us through. Just having that little bit of humor. So anytime you can just pick a little bit of humor out, I feel like that's sometimes the way you've got to get through it.
Yeah. And on that note, I agree with you, Jana. And on that note, that's how I watched my mom get through her struggles at the end, was through humor. She sarcastic, just cracking jokes. And that's how you cope. And so she gifted us that. She taught us that was a way to cope with sadness, and it has helped us as well for the last couple of years, for sure.
Sam, I think that, oh, sorry.
I was just going to say, it's funny you say too about the grieving better. I'm going to give a plug for this amazing play that I watched last summer called Good Grief. It was written by Richie Wilcox. It was performed at Ship's Company, and I really hope he puts it up somewhere else. But talking about exactly that, is finding ways to grieve well, because feeling your feelings is amazing. That's like a great step to getting through your grief process is just allowing yourself to be sad, because why wouldn't you be?
Exactly. It's not all one thing. It's the ebb and the flow of it, right?
Yeah.
And I think that I'm hoping that you have the same experience that I did, in that someday, somewhere, you'll be in a situation and you'll open your mouth and you'll think, wow, that was mom, or
Oh,
you'll
it's
say
already
things
happened. That has
I
already
love.
happened.
I can
For
attest
sure.
to
I
that.
feel like that comforts, right?
It is.
Because not only do you know she's still there, not only do you feel her energy, but you know that you're the continuation of her.
Oh yeah.
And you say the coolest things sometimes that they seem just completely out of nowhere, but yet it's that comfort factor of, she's still here because I'm still here.
Yep. 100%. Thank you.
That's beautiful. That's lovely. I did want to mention actually too, and Sam, you've touched on it, the amazing folks at Hospice Society here in town, Colchester Hospice Society. We actually work in partnership with them, but they are certainly the experts in grief and just managing your own grief journey in this area. Wonderful folks there, and everything's free of charge. I'll put in a little plug for them, but that's so important right now, particularly when we're trying to reach out and in terms of accessibility to helping professionals. They're certainly very accessible to do so, and we've actually been partnering with them because of the links that we see with mental health and grief, partnering with them to provide a Connecting Through Grief group, which is on every Wednesday in the Wentworth area right now, in Debert, for the next 6 weeks. And then I think they're doing a bit of a roadshow going to Brookfield. And we've really recognized as organizations, I think, we spent the pandemic kind of, pulled in to our organizations and trying to figure out how to manage it and keep everybody safe. And we've recognized that people are doing the same thing in their own communities, and they're not necessarily coming out, or they've been dealing with heavy topics like this on their own, and then keep thinking, I can handle it, even though there's significant impacts to mental health. So, if people feel they are struggling, they should reach out to people. We are coming out to the rural communities, I guess is my point in saying all that, coming to where we hope that people will feel comfortable in their own local church halls or legions to come out and start talking about this sensitive topic for them.
It's so good to see that community collaboration too. Just on a side note, like I just feel like having those two organizations recognizing that they can work together in supporting the community through grief and loss and mental illness is just such an important message for the community. I love it.
Yeah, we think so too. And there's enough work for everybody, if I can put it that way. And it's just different perspectives, I think, particularly when you're talking about grief and grieving journeys. It's a different perspectives, I think, that help. You say we want people to be able to pick up pearls. It's not a package deal. It's not a stamp. We're not experts. But if there's little pearls of resonating that can go for people, that's what we were hoping for today.
I think for me, it can be summed up in what a lot of us have been saying in the comments and we've been talking about, is finding those little things that can just bring a smile or make you laugh or make you remember the person that you've lost or the thing you've lost, depending on what it is that you're grieving, is just finding joy in those little moments as much as you can, because each moment is going to be different. That's what I've learned with my mental illness is you can't, like, I could feel like $1 million in the morning and by the afternoon feel like, a truck hit me from behind. So you have to appreciate the moments as they're happening, because you just don't know.
That's right. Yeah. Mindfulness. We talk about that a lot. How often we rush through our day. I chat about how you're in the shower and you're thinking about your day. What do I have to do? Instead of just appreciating the warm water, the smell of the shampoo, just the act of being. We're so dissociated from our feelings. But I know for me that being mindful has brought me, it's helped me with my grief journey, and also slowing down and noticing the small things, like we're saying, that may come out of the blue. That are they coincidence? Maybe so, maybe not. But if I'm rushing around and not really in my head and not paying attention, I'm not even going to notice those things. So Interesting. Somebody was saying here, Stella Lord actually shared that she belongs to a group called Death Matters, and they meet monthly on Zoom, and the meeting is called the Death Cafe. Isn't that cool? Right?
Yeah.
Again, just embracing that terminology that people are so afraid to use, like bringing up a memory of a loved one, like, saying that, like me saying to you, Sam, I was thinking about your mom today. Sometimes we're worried that if we say those things, that's going to trigger you or upset you. But I don't think that's the case usually, is it?
For me, and I always say, even if I start to tear up, that doesn't bother me. I will talk about my mom. And one of the messages that we were able to have a conversation with about before she died, which I was so grateful for, was she wants us to still talk about her like she's still here. There was a quote, and I'm not going to try to think of it right now because I would butcher it, but that's along those lines where it's like, talk about me like I'm like you always have. Like, don't shift your language around me. And so, yeah, I might tear up when you mention my mom, but that doesn't mean that. It's, again, us getting comfortable with having feelings in public. It's like, don't assume that just because I got emotional, I didn't want to have that conversation. I want you to ask me about my mom because I want you to remind me how important she was to you too. And so have in a safe space. I mean, certainly, there was conversation. One of my colleagues was just telling me there was conversation around a hockey player who was just interviewed yesterday, who was asked about his dying father after a hockey game. And, that's not the place to do that publicly and without warning. But if you're in a safe space with someone and you ask, absolutely do that. Because it shows that you loved them too, or that you love the person that you're talking to. So,
yeah, as someone's pointed out here in the comments, that I know, Jana, I know two people who have had stillborn babies, and both of them agree, say their name. They were here and they existed.
yeah.
So important, because otherwise, if we don't, it's like they never did exist, which I think is probably more painful and as painful.
I think sometimes we forget that we can just have simple conversations with someone. Like, I can just say to you, Susan, is it okay if I talk to you about your mom or your dad or whatever that is? You can, and then that gives the person the opportunity to say yes or no. And that's going to depend on the day or depend on your mood, whatever the case is. You can just ask the question and then move on depending on what the answer is. I sometimes think we forget those basics of just like, let's let that person decide how they want to discuss this person today, or if they don't want to discuss this person today.
Yeah, couldn't agree more. And then, as you say, they can give you permission, like this isn't a good time, or, not certainly fresh off the ice with the microphone in your face kind of thing, right? Yeah, that you have permission then. I think that's hard. That's part of the deal. Exactly. So you mentioned about expressing your feelings several times that are tips and been helpful to your mental health on your grief journey. Are there other things that have been really helpful to you in the last couple of minutes?
For a second, I thought you meant they've been helpful to me in the last couple of minutes.
Well, that too.
That too, yeah. I mean, I say this as if it's like, I'm going to sound very smart when I say it, but it's so simple, is just to drink your water, go outside, like those simple things. And I always feel silly saying it because shouldn't we all just know to do that on a regular basis? But we don't. Mm-hmm. And your mental health, your mental illness, if you have one, gets in the way of that all the time. It keeps you frozen in your bed or on your couch or wherever. So actually making an effort and taking the time to, did I drink all of the water that I should have had today? Like, did I get out for a 30-minute walk or whatever? Like, actually make yourself accountable for that. And Kern, I love your comment about self-compassion, because yes, in those moments when you don't get outside for a walk that day, don't beat yourself up about it either. Try your hardest not to, because that's not going to get you anywhere either. Just know that tomorrow is another day, and I'm going to give it another go tomorrow, and try to be kind to yourself.
Yeah, very important. I mean, there's a reason why people bring casseroles after someone's passed away, because really you're paralyzed, and who has the energy to deal with things, and throw in a pre-existing mental health issue. And yeah, you're right. You may not be getting out of bed for a while. So just those reminders. Eating well is who eats, and yet our body
eating period.
Eating period. Yeah.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah. And sorry, I laughed. I wasn't laughing about that. That's for me, the first thing to go is eating. It's like, if I didn't have somebody who could help make me a meal when I'm feeling low, then I wouldn't be eating at all. It's just one of those things.
I think you've got lots of company in that regard, for sure.
Yeah.
One of the other things that I certainly have heard from my mom talk about is not to make any major life decisions, postpone any huge decisions that you're making. For example, like selling your home and after a spouse passes away, or, just give a little bit of time, because you're just not in a great place to make those decisions. You're dealing with huge grief and impacts on your mental health.
Yeah, for sure.
Well, here I was worried about how we would fill the hour, and I shouldn't have worried at all. I just want to say thank you very much, Sam, for sharing your journey. I know it's been a difficult, like you said, as you began, you warned us, and I only saw you tear up once or twice. So we very much appreciate your ability to be vulnerable and your willingness to let us crawl inside your head, I guess, and your thoughts, and share those feelings with people that we usually don't express. We usually just say, "Oh, I'm fine, thanks, and how are you?" and we move on with our day. So certainly, developing empathy and creating empathetic communities that are responsive to people with mental health issues. You've done a huge part today, Sam, and we really appreciate it. Again, it's so honored to call you my friend. Yeah.